Hello and welcome to the Volleycast. I am your host, Joe Trinity, and on the other line from the Great White North, we got Ben Josephson. Ben, how you doing?
Doing great. It's nice and warm. It's not too bad out here anymore. Spring has come.
Yeah. So Ben is the head coach for Trinity Western men's team up in Canada, Vancouver area, Canada. And also how we got to know each other was being part of the staff for the Canadian women's national team. Ben's an assistant coach, Canadian women's national team. So he's on the men's side on the collegiate game, the youth sports in Canada, and he's on the women's side of the national team level. So, and more importantly, just an awesome guy, great dad, and good guy, just all around good hang. So, what are you doing with yourself right now? Your season's over, unfortunately.
Season's over. Abrupt finish. We had the national tournament canceled the day before we started play, which is really too bad. But now we're trying to figure out what to do and where to go. But, getting housework is kind of what's calling our names now. So we're typically take a couple weeks off here from the team, but so it's lots of catch up with the family. But I guess we're all strategizing on what's next for volleyball.
Yeah, just on the Canadian Youth Sports Federation, I think a lot of NCAA coaches are wondering what's going to be going on with eligibility, and maybe there's some talk that guys are going to get their eligibility back and not have the season count or something like that. Has there even been any discussion up there in Canada and how they're handling that, or just waiting and seeing?
No, the reality is only 8 teams were left playing. Everybody else had been eliminated. So, literally, the national championship was less than 24 hours away when they shut the season down. So there's only 8 teams affected. And, they got all but 3 days out of their seasons, and the seniors did. So there's really no talk of that on our end.
Are you just going to hang the national championship banner and assume you guys would have won it?
Yeah, we're starting to appeal for that. We were number 1 in the RPI, so we figured they should just give it to the number 1 RPI team. But there's a bunch of the schools who argue that, I guess.
Yeah, so we're talking on Zoom. Are you doing some Zoom meetings with your guys? Like, you probably didn't have a chance to have exit interviews or anything like that?
No, honestly, it was a whirlwind. So they gave us the go-ahead for the national tournament at our coaches meeting the night before. And then they called us all back an hour later, and then they told us youth sports pulled the plug. So we had to gather our team. Most of those guys had already gone to bed. So we had to pull them all out and meet together and break the news that it was over. And so, the next 3, then we had to try to get our flights changed, and everyone scrambled to get back home. And it was a whirlwind. So this last week, it's just been trying to, a lot of the guys, they've all left school. School's now all online. So they've all flown back to their homes and made their road trips back. So we just basically said, everybody get settled, and then we'll touch base next week and figure out where to go. And some guys are making their professional plans for next year, but the agents and the pro teams they don't even know what their sponsors are like or what it's going to be. So they don't really know what contracts they can offer. We have no idea. All of our gyms are shut down. So, if we get opened up, maybe end of April, we'll pull them back for a couple months of training if we can, but I doubt it.
Yeah, it's kind of indecision that's killing everybody. Obviously there's people who are being way more affected than just losing the volleyball season. So we're not trying to act like it's the end of the world, but our world is volleyball to some extent. And it's difficult for players. I think obviously at the collegiate level, and, I know at the juniors level here in the States, it's not, things are postponed. And I think most people are figuring postponed is probably going to mean canceled. But I think just still a little bit of wait and see, which makes sense, just kind of wait and see and see how things end up going. But I think that's just a lot where coaches can help give players a little bit of guidance or reassurance, or just, probably I got to imagine a lot of the teenage players just going a little stir crazy, trying to figure out what to do.
Well, our biggest concern is eligibility stuff academically. You take a bunch of dudes and you send them home and you say they got to finish classes online. That's not always the best. When they're, at least they're all on campus, you can organize the schedules and help them out with study halls and your tutors and everything that you have in place on campus now that they're on their own. So we're trying to, again, build systems. How do we have follow-ups with the different assistant coaches and the seniors? And how do we make sure that these guys finish on a good note? Because I think that's where you can see academics fall apart on top of all the other things.
So do you have any specifics that you are doing there? Do you have a schedule with your staff checking? Like, are players checking in with a staff member at certain times? How are you handling that?
Yeah, we're just trying to divide up the roster to all the different staff members, and basically you guys handle these 4 players and so on and so forth. And the department's got some different learning coaches that are available to each team. So you kind of link up with a learning coach and ideally get them hooked up as best you can. It's just really complicated with online stuff because you can't really share documents, with the athletes. So everything's on Skype meetings, and yeah, there's a lot of kind of red tape when it comes to how do you support the athletes,
Really?
what you're legally allowed to do academically. So yeah, it's just kind of everyone's learning through it all at the same time. But I think just making sure that we're connected to them kind of every week and following through as best we can. It's only about a month and a half left here, so
Yeah,
it's going to be kind of crazy.
figure out how to get them through it.
Seriously, we have a couple guys who I'm very nervous for, so we'll see. Those guys are on my list. I'll call them every day.
Yeah. The assistants can handle the A- students.
You got it.
Head coach got to take care of the C's.
Seems like all the guys with the big verticals are on my list. So
that's how it goes, huh? Recruiting. They were on your list in recruiting, and now same deal.
You got it.
Cool. Well, we were talking about this article, I shared with you on email, and it's kind of a pivot here. And I'll put a link to this article in the show notes so anybody who wants to check it out, who's listening, can check it out. But it's an article by a guy named Simon Wardley, and it's more about business end, but I thought it really applied to coaching. It's called basically Pioneers, Settlers, and Town Planners. And I immediately thought of it related to coaching because this article is basically talking about how each of these aspects requires its own form of brilliance. Business pioneers, or like before that, like actual pioneers, they have to be brilliant in their own way. They have to go out and they have to innovate, for lack of a better term, and deal with a chaotic environment, things that have never been dealt before, and they're going to like mess a lot of stuff up, but they have to do that. And then you have like the settlers, who are sort of like the next stage. They follow up with the good ideas behind the pioneers, and they're kind of the next wave. And then you have the town planners who, okay, once we see where there's a good place to go, we come in and we systematize things and we kind of get things in place. And it made me think about coaches. Some coaches love to be out there on the fringe and innovate and try a bunch of wacky stuff, even if it messes up. And, some coaches are kind of like the master town planners. It's what works. Don't have time for the crazy stuff. Like, okay, what works? Let's do it. Let's systematize it. Let's teach it to everybody. And some coaches are kind of a little bit in between. And I'm curious where you see yourself. Like, where would you put yourself in that category?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that ever since you shared this. I think I'd probably settle as a settler, to be honest. I think there's the kind of thing that resonated with me was the idea of taking somebody else's innovation. So you're not inventing, you're not the first guy through the breach, and you kind of see what's out there. And then how do I maximize what is already there? So if this is a blocking system, for instance, how do I take what has already currently been designed and is proven to be effective, and how do I maximize it by utilizing that, plus adding another piece and kind of making the most of things that already exist? And then instead of reinventing the wheel, how do I just make it a more efficient wheel? And then I think the town planner bit, I think I see some of that in myself and what I do, but I think that's more from a culture standpoint. I think I really believe a lot in the town planner things from a cultural standpoint. It's how do you systematize your culture to make sure that it stays moving forward and consistent. But from a volleyball standpoint, I don't like the idea of systematizing things quite as much, as more just making things more efficient the way they currently are. So maybe town planner from a cultural standpoint, and a settler from a kind of coaching standpoint. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely, on the volleyball side, I'd put you a little, I know you're interested in trying new things, and like we would always talk about that on road trips or whatever like that. Like, hey, what if we kind of set the ball here and maybe try something a little different? We're always, sometimes we, sometimes it's almost the company you keep, right? Because you're around certain people, it's like, okay, the thing that I can do best for them is to be just more organized and bring them down to earth. But then around other groups, so that's kind of what I was thinking for myself, is like, I can really actually relate to all three of these aspects actually. And for me, just kind of being this sort of like roving nomad coach, I work with lots of different programs throughout the course of years or in a multiple year run. And like, sometimes they need somebody, like I've definitely been an assistant coach and it's a town plan, like, okay, my job is to come here during this training block and teach these skills this way and provide that support to the team. And I've done that. And there's also times like, I'm coming out to Egypt and helping them get a girls volleyball program going out there in an area where there's not much girls sports. And it's like, okay, that's pioneering for sure. And I think I kind of lean towards the pioneer naturally, like, and just like, I love just thinking about just the wacky stuff. And it's like, what if we did that? So I guess like maybe I'm in the settler there a little bit too, because I really like, my biggest role, I guess, is as a clinician, as somebody who works with programs for short times. So I like seeing who's innovating and trying to figure out ways to share and connect that to others, like who maybe haven't thought of playing the game that way or anything like that.
I agree. And I think, for me with the pioneer stuff, I think that's best utilized once you have kind of a base of what you're trying to do. So, I mean, in the article, it talks about the cyclical nature of these three, where they kind of build upon each other. Whereas it doesn't really talks about town planners lead to almost pioneers creating a new market or a new area of volleyball, or business. But I think it almost works kind of up and down, maybe not just in a circle. Like, so for me, when I was thinking about maybe being more of a settler, I think when you have a solid base while you're, let's say you're settling, that's when you can look for more innovation. So I think some of the things that we were talking about with highball stuff, I mean, I would love to try that stuff, but only because we have a really good proficiency in highball.
Yep.
So then now we're looking for a little bit, well, now that we know how to play a highball system, how do we innovate it a little bit better, as opposed to making it more for the masses, more systematized? And maybe I don't quite understand the town planner as well as I should, but for me, once you kind of have a base of how you want to block, now how do you innovate a new block system to layer into it? And I think that's kind of why I kind of connected the settlers, is they're just kind of making everything better the whole time without kind of thinking too far ahead or behind. They're just kind of right in the moment, making your block system better. How do you serve a little bit better, this weekend, instead of reinventing a new serve or systematizing serves in a way that's very consistent? And I don't really like either of those. I like taking stuff that, we know exists, and how do we maximize it in a way that, incorporates both the system and the innovation a little bit.
Yeah. It's funny that you said highball, because that's exactly what I thought of too. And you watch something like the Beijing Olympic Games on the men's side, and it was very systematized. I feel like the game was very systematized, and that was part of how USA was so effective. And but you watch some of the out of system rallies, and it's like high ball, triple block, tip to the setter, go put up or tip to the D ball hitter, go put up a triple block over there, tip, and it's like patty cake back and forth. And then you needed some pioneer, like it almost was too systematized, and you needed some pioneers to go out there and like, let's just, and probably at that time there was already people kind of doing this stuff. You just maybe didn't see it as much, and then kind of shook up the things a little bit. And now you see a little more innovation, a little more creativity and now that's being systematized. And teams, I think, like for example, on the men's side, they're trying to figure out like, okay, when do we play just for the recycle? And then, but blockers are changing and adapting to that, and blocking a little bit differently when they think there's going to be a recycle and this and that. So it's, what makes me think of also is there's probably a little bit to do, because basically you said you got to have a level of proficiency if you want to innovate. My good friend Mike Wall on the USA men's staff, and work with him at Gold Medal Squared. he compares it to watching a great musician solo and start riffing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're first learning the guitar, you're not innovating anything. You don't even know how to play the chords. You don't know how to play the chords. You don't know how to hold your hand. You don't know how to do any of that. Only after you've put in hours and hours of the fundamentals that's when the creativity, that's when the innovation can happen. So in a lot of ways, I think of like this town planner, like what that made me think of was like juniors clubs.
Mm-hmm.
For juniors clubs who have less practice time, sometimes less motivated athletes who, not across the board, but, and, that's what I see well-run juniors clubs. They have a little bit of that systematization so that they can train their new coaches who are often inexperienced coaches. So you have inexperienced players and inexperienced coaches. And that's where having some model, but then the trap there is they fall out of touch. They've been doing their systematized model the same way, been run the same way for 8 years, and not looking at what the higher level teams are doing and filtering that back to them appropriately.
For sure. Well, and I think we've talked about this before, but like probably every innovation in the game hasn't come from a coach. It's come from a player.
Exactly.
Right. So, I mean, even just think about probably how the jump serve was invented. I don't know how, but I'm assuming there's a couple guys jerking around in practice going, hey, man, how far back can you hit the ball and hit it in? And then one guy probably said, like, watch this. I'll hit it from the service line. And he spiked it in bounds. And like some coach probably watched and was like, hey, I think that's legal. Like, we should try to actually figure out how to train this. This is a cool weapon. Or think about like Engapeth coming, maybe they wanted him to set the ball on 2 because he was a better setter than the libero. And then he's probably like, forget this. I'm just going to spike it. And then he just jumped. And then he realized, oh boy, I can't spike. This is too tight. So he set it. And then that famous snowman block ball was born. And now we as coaches are all organizing that. And I know for us, like we have a system of how to train that. We have drills, we have teaching keys, we have offensive patterning that works from the pipe on 2. But it all started by either, I don't know, it was Engapeth or who it was who first did it. But I think we see these athletes do something creative and we try to figure out how to organize it. And this is probably the sequence, right? You have a pioneer who creates the event. Then we figure out a way to make it trainable in the settlers. And then somebody has build a system of how to incorporate it into your offense. And I think that's probably the sequence of every innovation. And that's just a kind of a one skill bit. But I feel like you're one of the few coaches I've been around who you're the one who's innovating stuff with the double high ball spikes or all the other
when we finally unveil the Trinity double, then it will be really now.
You know what?
I think that kind of like what you're hitting on there is just that coach's role of connecting. Like there's a little humility there because you understand like it's not going to be just you are not going to invent everything. And you can't, and it's got to come from the players. But then as a coach, like, can we kind of stay on the right edge where we're not getting stale, but we're not so, like the cost of innovation is a lot of innovation doesn't work.
Right. So for sure.
That's a tough thing if we're going to come in and change the way we play offense every single year, change the way we block or change all this stuff that can lead to some real inconsistency. So it's like, how do you find that balance of innovating, but not feeling like the players are like, why are we changing everything all the time?
The other problem is if you go too far the other way, and if everything's based on stats and organized numbers, then you're behind the game because somebody's figured out, stats and numbers can only prove what exists. It can't prove what can be. So innovators, if they're too far on one end, right, like they're doing crazy things and it's just not very efficient. But then if you're too deeply structured into following a number, well, then you're playing a percentage, but that's only going to be good enough to let's say 80% of the game. Somebody's finding that sweet spot where they're using the numbers and analytics to support what they're doing, but they're staying just ahead of the curve by adding the innovations that are productive and finding ways that, again, that's why I think you see, certain teams and coaches that are always seem to be just ahead of everybody else because they're not crazy people in reinventing the game, but they're also not stuck following the, conventional wisdom. And you're right, there's a sweet spot. And I think that maybe, that's that settler's idea, like the ideal settler as a balance between pioneering and planning, but kind of fluctuates back and forth. And, when I was reading that, I was like, that's what I want to be. I'm not sure if I am, but I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I kind of feel the same way. And I don't know if we feel the same way because that's what we gravitate towards. So yeah, I must be right. But but no, I think I feel a lot about that too. And part of me also wonders, there's a little bit of where your program is in its
Hmm.
cycle. You know, I
For sure.
like I think it was actually more of like a strength training article that I was reading, and it was talking about going from excuse my language here, everybody, but from shit to suck, from suck to good, and good to great. And it was sort
Yep.
of saying there's some different things that go along the whole time. So if you're taking over a program that's like really at the bottom, innovation might not be so necessary.
For sure.
So it's like the organized, systematized system, like really prescriptive, very like almost like you said, almost backwards looking and saying like, okay, here's the statistical, here's what worked, et cetera, et cetera. That might be what the team needs to go from last to middle of the pack, or even a little bit ahead of middle of the pack. But then a lot of times it's tough to win a championship looking backwards. So if you're trying to go from that good to great, there's going to have to be some measure of sticking a toe into semi-uncharted waters,
For
you know?
sure.
So I think that's the challenge of the coach, right? Is like, and you're talking about kind of that settler mentality is like, okay, we're going to take what we know what works, and then we're going to try to look at what the crazy pioneers are doing and try to
Yeah.
anticipate what's the one or two things that hasn't been proven yet. But
Yeah.
based on my judgment, based on my pattern recognition, I think that's the one or two things that we need to do to stay on the edge.
And also your personnel group, like you said, it's a little
Yeah.
bit based on where your program's is. If you have the athletes who can pull off some of the things that they're doing at the top levels in European volleyball, then you can do that. But if you're like, again, like you said, a junior club, you're probably not pulling a pipe on two to the middle player. I
No.
mean, that's crazy, but that's what some people are doing at the very highest level. So if you got the personnel to pull it off, and then also I think your context of your job, like, I mean, if your job is to teach the game, then you're not working on that stuff. But if your job is to put people in the stands in a professional league, then yeah, you are probably doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go to a pro game and watch people hit float serves,
No.
right? They want to see people bang and spike in the men's game. So you're going to see 8 missed serves a set. But if to win Olympic games, this might not be the right idea. The
Yeah.
Olympic coaches their job is to win the Olympics, not put on a show for the fans with the bells and the whistles. So I mean, that, like you said, I think it's your context. But I also think that the pioneers, settlers, and town planners have a little bit to do with like the maybe like the type of coach you are. So for me, I got handed this program after they had just won 4 straight national medals. So the pioneering was done. The recruiting was already pretty easy. So I mean, I
The
could
ones we
joke that I was given the keys to a Porsche. Just try not to crash it as I learned to drive. But the reality is I mean, I didn't have to do a lot of town planning, but I kind of, the structure was already in place. Whereas you almost watch like a little bit like with Canada, some of the stuff Tom is doing is a lot of that had to do with town planning. We
Yep.
had so much systems to be put in place and to manage and to organize with the staff and all the IST people. And there was so much town planning from a national team head coach.
Yep.
And I wonder, if you're coaching, like you said, Egypt, maybe you're doing lots of pioneering because you're just learning everything from scratch. So I wonder if there's certain people who are wired for different types of coaching.
Yep.
I just don't know. I don't think I'd be very good as a pioneer, like you said. I don't even know how to teach the fundamentals of the game. I've never had to teach that.
Yeah.
But I've also never had to do what Tom did and like implement systems at that level. So, I mean, I think this was settlers. Maybe that's why I gravitate to it. That's kind of been
Yeah.
my wheelhouse and my experience. Maybe I got to get outside the box and
No, I
get a little
think
bit uncomfortable.
I think that's a huge thing because team. It's the oldest cliche is a team is not the 12 best players; it's the 12 players that play best together, or whatever you say. And I think I think like this idea, we tend to think of like a coach is a good coach or a decent coach or a bad coach, and so much of it's contextual. This coach is a good coach for that program. This coach is not so good for that program, et cetera. And, of course, I think as coaches, maybe we're just trying to raise our level overall. Like, could we coach anybody, et cetera?
Right.
And then there's a little bit of like the breadth versus depth. Like, do you want to be like pretty good at like here and here? And like in a lot of ways, that's me. Like, because I work with so many different programs. like, I don't know if I don't
But
think it would be as good, at least not right now, at like leading a program that a lot of coaches that I see leading programs, because they know how to run that program and things are dialed in, kind of like what you were talking about, like your culture, you feel like you have it on the town planner level, and you have that like really dialed in. And then it's okay, just make sure we're innovating on the volleyball end enough to put all that to work. And some different stuff like that. I think knowing who you are as a coach so you can be authentic.
sure.
Like, I think that's one of the interesting takeaways of the article is like there's a brilliance required in any three of those categories. So I think like when you know where you gravitate towards, where your strengths are, then you can apply them in an authentic way, in a way that's going to feel authentic to your players.
Well, for sure. And I think that was something we talked about this summer is, I mean, it was really uncomfortable coaching Canada this summer because it was so far outside of my context. It's like, I'm a really good men's Canadian university coach because I understand the context well. I've mastered at Trinity Western University. So maybe at a different school, maybe, it's completely different. So, I mean, walking into Canada's gym, I had no confidence that I was a good coach because it was not my content. It was a different gender. It was a different level. It was a different style of coaching. It was a different role as an assistant. I mean, there were so many things that are different that it just was really eye-opening with how much our belief system as a coach is based on our context, and our confidence doesn't really translate. I mean, again, the game's the game, but the volleyball is the easiest part of coaching.
Totally.
It's the people and the relationships and the context you have to be put in. That's the hard part of coaching and leadership. And so again, learning and watching how Tom navigated that was fascinating, but just being completely rattled inside of, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore, was kind of the prevailing thought driving to the gym every day. And then you kind of have to work through is like, all right, this connects to this. And then you start almost like nailing things down to the wall. It's like, all right, I understand how passing works still. It is a little bit different, but now it makes sense. And I wonder if maybe every context you go through that pioneer settler town planner process, just even in a month, just thinking about where we were in the beginning of May to where we're at the end of the summer is maybe that's kind of how every coach has to go through it. Is everything seems like it's brand new, and the faster you can learn and be flexible working through the levels, maybe the faster you can learn. I don't know, but it was weird. That's for sure.
For sure. Well, we're all adapting to a situation that we've never dealt with before. So we'll see. We'll see whether it's a couple weeks, couple months, or however long, and see how this changes the game of volleyball. But no, I don't want to be respectful of your time. I'm trying to keep these to about a half hour, so that we'll have to get on another call soon. So because we could
for sure. Well, we got all this extra time now, Joe. We got all this extra time. We just got to start innovating, and we'll do a whole podcast of all the harebrained ideas we can come up with in the next month.
Well, one of the things that I was saying to Dave Hunt the other day was like, either the first practices back are going to be the greatest practices ever because every coach is so on to plan, or the players are all going to like want to quit because every coach is going to be like so far up their butt, like, but I got this idea. Totally. Players are going to be like, relax, we just want to bump set and spike for a minute, like, so.
Well, usually at Christmas in the Canadian calendar, we have usually a break in December. So we finish conference the first week, and then we really don't start again until after Christmas. So it's this 3-week window where my guys always joke that every time they come back from Christmas, I've come up with something insane and thought it through, and we try it. And more often than not, that's where my pioneer shows up. Is we try it and it's just an absolute fail. So 10 days into the second semester, we give up on this whole plan and go back to what we were doing. But I think that's what you're right. That's what it's going to be when everyone gets back to it.
I know. I love it. And coaches out there, now's the time to be a pioneer. Think of some innovations, and I don't know. Hit us back. Let us know what you guys are thinking about, and let us know if you think see yourself as a pioneer, settler, or town planner. And I don't know, Ben, if any coaches want to hit you up, you got a social media people can hit you up at, or?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I don't even know what my handle is. I think it's just Ben Josephson, or else you can hit me up on my email, ben.josephson@twu.ca. So please, if you have anything up, I've got lots of time, so hit me up.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us, and yeah, everybody listening out there, just love to hear what you guys are thinking about. I'll post this link to this article in the show notes, and let's keep figuring out ways to be good for our players when we can't be in the gym with them.
No doubt.
All right. Take care, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. How do I stop this recording? Okay.